try and keep an eye on the time. Thank you all so much for having me here, but also just for the great work that you do, and it's wonderful to see so many friends from long ago, as well as people who just feel like friends because we're all in the same line of work now. So as Brian mentioned, my name is Ara Sunata Newlin. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about my own background and how I came to be with the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation. But also my story is a Japanese-American story, but also very much a Wyoming story. And I start off with my grandparents. These are my grandparents, George and Susan Sonata, and you can see them very proudly, posing with their Wyoming Cowboys football helmet. And this is a sign that my grandfather painted. He was an artist, and this sign was hanging on their front porch for as long as I can remember in Logan, Utah at the time. We're not foreign, we're from Wyoming. And as you can see from their faces, they look Japanese. And this is it's kind of a comical sign. People see it and they smile, but it also gives you this sort of uncomfortable sense that if he had to even paint a sign that said this and hang it on his door, it means that they were questioned their whole lives. What are you doing here? Where are you from? Ma, your English is good. And so, in a way, this is a friendly but also pointed reminder that, no, actually, we're from Wyoming. And as I talk to groups around the country, I say, I recognize that being from Wyoming is kind of foreign for many people. But for us, it's not. And it takes a little bit of explaining to understand how somebody can be Japanese American of my grandparents' generation and also be from Wyoming. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you think about the history of Japanese Americans in Wyoming as most of us know it. I will be talking about Japanese American incarceration at Heart Mountain between Cody and Powell during World War II. But my family actually came to Wyoming straight from Japan long before the camp was built. In the early 1900s, this is my great-grandfather, Morijito, and great-grandmother, Toku. They came from Japan straight to Wyoming in the early 1900s on the Sonata side. And just briefly, they came, the family, the brothers were coal miners in the Superior coal mine. And my great-grandfather, Morijito, was a laundry worker. And this is a picture of his laundry tent in Yellowstone National Park, which would be totally illegal now. But he just, set up camp to do laundry for the tourists with some amazing photographic evidence there. After that first summer in Yellowstone, he formalized the business, and here's a picture from 1922 of his Green River hand laundry and dry cleaning business. They had a formal building as well, so the car and the building, and this was there were small pockets of Japanese Americans or Japanese immigrants and their American-born children in Wyoming before the war. This little guy, oh look, I don't even know how to use there. That guy is my grandfather who painted the sign, "We're not foreign, we're from Wyoming." So that's it. I mean, he grew up here. All of his siblings grew up here. So even though his face is Japanese, he's a Wyoming boy. And this is on my mother's side of the family. I should clarify, I'm fourth generation Japanese American, and I'm mixed race, so I'm Japanese on my mother's side and Irish on my father's side. So on my mom's side, this is her mother's family. The other was her father's family. Great-grandpa Rokuzaimon and his bride Takeko, they also came straight to Wyoming from Japan in the early 1900s. He came to work on the railroad. And I was just talking to Bob from the Kemmer area, and I said, I bet, this southwest Wyoming part of the state is where my relatives were. And my grandmother would always say, we kids were born all up and down the railroad tracks between Ogden, Utah, and Cheyenne, Wyoming, as her dad worked as a section foreman on the railroad. And this is one of the homes that their family had lived in Actually, this one's in Utah, but they had railroad housing that they lived in. Now, on my grandmother's side, after spending 30 years in Wyoming, my great-grandfather retired from the railroad. He moved the family to East Hollywood, California, took the family savings and invested in a market that it's hard to see, but you can see, he named it the Wyoming Market in East Hollywood, California. And as my grandmother writes, she says they were just starting to settle in, and then the bombs fell on Pearl Harbor, and another kind of bomb fell on the Japanese-American community of the West Coast. So, ironies of all ironies, they were now in California. This is not a historic picture, this is of our museum that we have up at Heart Mountain. But signs like this went up all over the West Coast, instructing all persons of Japanese ancestry to report and ultimately be rounded up, sent to 10 camps around the country, and my family ended up getting sent back to Wyoming after starting their lives here, which is mind-blowing. And this is a picture of them in front of their barrack at Heart Mountain. Obviously, this was devastating, but it gives me a little bit of comfort to imagine that they at least felt like they were coming home. Different part of the state, but they were familiar with Wyoming winters, and they knew what it was like, and they knew this wide open landscape, and I have to think it would have been comforting to them to come back here. If they had to be incarcerated, at least it was home in Wyoming. Now, on my grandfather's side, my grandpa who painted the sign, he was still living in southern Wyoming at the time that Pearl Harbor was bombed. And so the folks inland, it was only the people in California, Oregon, and Washington who were rounded up and placed in camps. Anybody who lived inland was not incarcerated, but it doesn't mean they didn't suffer. This is a headline from the Rock Springs Rocket in 1942, February. My grandfather himself was working for the Union Pacific Railroad at the time, and he, along with all of the other people of Japanese ancestry working on the railroad, were fired because of their heritage. And my grandfather, bless his heart, he wrote this letter to the president of the Union Pacific Railroad, very articulately, for folks who learn about race, in America, part of what is telling about this letter is that it was so articulate. He had to be very polite in the way he expressed himself. But he wrote this beautiful letter saying, it's just not right to fire everybody just because of their ancestry. Now, he did not get a response from the president of the Union Pacific Railroad, but he did get a visit from the FBI soon thereafter. They came knocking, saying, there must be something suspicious about this guy if he were to protest. And he, in his writings, talks about how the FBI agent showed up and said, did you write this letter? And sort of questioning him like, you couldn't possibly have written this letter because it's so well written, this English is so good. And my grandfather said, I graduated from high school and I probably got better grades than you did. But nevertheless, that's how I come to this work. I'm also a born and raised Wyoming girl. I was born in Riverton, graduated Riverton High School, graduated from University of Wyoming, and now I am up at Heart Mountain. So my family has been involved with Heart Mountain for, just like Siobhan said, this has been a work of my whole life. I served on the board of the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation for 9 years, and then I have been in the role of executive director for 2 years. And I thought I knew a little bit about historic preservation before I took on this role. Boy, did I not know anything about what we were doing. So what I'd like to do today is give you an update on the work that we have done, the work that we are doing. There's a tremendous period of growth for us. And so I'm just going to update you on all of the things going on. Karen gave just the perfect introduction to everything I have to say. I'm just echoing what Karen and what Siobhan have been emphasizing. what we're doing is building connections in the present. It's very much about the relevance of this history now and the need to build community now. But we're building these connections by preserving remnants of the past, and we're doing this for the sake of the future. And I have a really beautiful analogy, I guess, from Japanese arts, Japanese ceramic arts. There's a style called kintsugi, and my friend and colleague Duncan Williams, who's a Zen priest, has drawn this connection. So this art form is taking pottery that has been broken. I don't know if they actively break it or they just take broken pieces, and they put the piece back together and highlight the cracks with gold. And so what you come out with is a piece of art that is more beautiful having been repaired with gold than it was before it was ever broken. And it's called kintsugi. And my friend Duncan talks about repairing the racial karma of America. What we're doing with preservation efforts around Japanese American incarceration is making something beautiful out of what was ruptured. This is a very dark past, but I see this because we're working on it. We're placing that gold in those cracks. This is a moment of celebration for all of us who are working on these preservation efforts, because the connection that comes out of it is really tremendous, and it's inspiring, and it's heartwarming. So because this camp at Hard Mountain was a town, for 3 years between 1942 and 1945, at any given time there were about 10,000 people who lived at Hard Mountain. So it was a whole town. It was the third largest city in Wyoming at the time. And there's almost nothing left of it now. If you go to the camp, there are a few historical remnants, but it's mostly empty. And so what we're doing with preservation is trying to track what had been taken away and also preserve what is still there. And the barracks are one of those really poignant pieces of history that is still there, just in different ways. So there's a picture of the original camp, what the barracks looked like. There's the guys, playing football out in front of their barrack. And after the war, the barracks were sold off for $1 a piece as part of a post-war effort, especially for returning veterans, as an incentive for people to come and homestead the land. And so that's why none of these barracks, this whole city that was there, is gone. The barracks were taken away, sold off for $1 a piece. And what's incredible, and we have one of the experts on this topic here in the room, Eric Sandine, who's also a member of our board of directors. He's probably one of the first people to start doing research on what happened to these barracks afterwards. What happened to them? They're still there. They're just scattered all around the county and all around the state. And people had bought them and converted them into sheds and barns and even homes. And so they still live out there, and they took on a new life that has a new, what was the word from this morning with the app, the period of significance? So the period of significance for the original barracks was obviously World War II era, but they have this new life, the homesteading era, and that story and that kind of meaning up until the presence of the lives of the people who have made these their homes. It's a complicated history. You make a home out of somebody else's hardship, but this is part of the community building that we are doing. So here's an example of what happened to one of the barracks after the war. It went all the way over to Shell Canyon, and it was part of an ecology field station for Iowa State University in, I think, 2016. This barrack, I don't remember exactly how it happened, but somehow we ended up with it back at Hard Mountain. I think they gifted it back to us, but we had to figure out how to move it from Shell Canyon back to Cody. And oh my gosh, look, we had to load it up on a semi-truck. There it is, driving through Grable, pulling it over the mountain, eventually bringing it back home to Hard Mountain. and we did archaeological work to make sure it was, we placed it on a foundation where an original barrack was. It's not on its own exact spot, but it's on a spot that had a barrack. And since then, we have restored it to look, it's not full-blown restoration. It's more, what's the word? Like, we're making it look like it did originally. It's not actually restoring it to its original condition. But it gives us incredible interpretive power. So this now looks like the barracks once did. And Eric, you haven't even seen this because this is like 1 week old. We are now in the process of again, it's not restoring, but making the inside of the barrack look like it would have been for not just any family, but for a specific family, where we are going off of the drawings and memories and stories of a specific family who lived in a unit this size, and we're going to mock it up. And just last week we got the cots in, and our reaction was, whoa, it feels way smaller in here when you put 7 beds in. And that's the point. People can walk into this and be like, how did people live in this tiny space, a whole family with all of those beds? You can't even walk. Like, we're trying to figure out where to put all of the furniture that we know was in there. So incredible potential. But I was, my mind was going this morning with Eric, because there's a project that my predecessor, Dakota Russell, had started that got interrupted by the pandemic, which was the Bighorn Basin Barracks Count. One of the things that animates the local community more than anything else about our history is the barracks, because a lot of folks grew up in them, or they know, like, oh yeah, my neighbor's property had one, and do you know about that one? There's even some in Riverton, and I speak in Riverton, people are like, oh, do you know about that one out at Pavilion? And so, but we don't really know, we haven't mapped where they all are. Eric started this process, he knows where a lot of them are, but now with this map, Damien, I'm going to be reaching out to you, and I'm talking with Brian and others. We want to resume this Bighorn Basin Barracks Count as a way of engaging the local community, having them help us identify where all the barracks are, and we can photograph them. And it's a way to keep telling this story in terms of the afterlife of the camp, and how history isn't just history. I know none of you think that it's just history, but it's a complicated history that continues on to the present. So we're working a lot with the homesteaders and the locals to make this feel like it's their history as well as ours, meaning Japanese Americans. Also, though, long before Japanese Americans were forcibly moved to this place, indigenous peoples were forcibly removed from this place. Lots of different nations called this their home, most predominantly the Apsaloka people, more commonly known as the Crow people. And one of the best things that I've done in my tenure as executive director so far is to start telling these stories more actively. Again, hats off to my predecessor, Dakota Russell, who started building these networks. But now I am thrilled to say that on our full-time staff, we have a member of the Apsaloka Nation. His name is Johnny Tim Yellowtail. He's our historic site caretaker, and his role that I've crafted is to help us with maintaining the physical aspects of our campus, as we're now sort of thinking of it, doing groundskeeping, monitoring the historic structures, but also tending to the spiritual dynamics of the site in ways that feel appropriate both to Japanese Americans, who we think of this as a sacred site, but also tending to the spiritual needs of a site in ways that resonate with what he feels like would be appropriate from his perspective as a member of the Apsaloka Nation. And so part of what he does is lead guided tours of the site outside of our museum, where he relates stories of Japanese American incarceration, and he also relates stories of, his ancestors and what that mountain meant to them, what this landscape meant to them, one of the most extraordinary times that we've had with Johnny Tim since he started about a little over a year ago was we had a visit from the San Jose Taiko group, a professional performing ensemble, drumming ensemble. They came to our site, and Johnny Tim himself is an award-winning singer and dancer in his tradition and drummer. And so he performed for them and invited the Taiko group, this Japanese drumming group, to learn and play with him. Here they are inside the barrack. And this cross-community dialogue happened that was incredible. And I captured some of the comments from the San Jose Taiko members afterwards. And I'm sharing some of them here with you. So one member said, there's so much information, but there's also this emotional connection with the site. When Johnny Tim was talking about the land, it drove home that just like there's multi-generational trauma of people, there's multi-generational trauma of land. It really made me feel like the land itself has a spirit. Having him there, giving a prayer, it made the land come alive for me. It allowed the land to know that it could be part of our experience, and it made us realize that this happened to the land as well. So it's really connecting to landscape, not just a kind of human history thing, but a landscape thing. I felt a sense of welcoming that I wouldn't have been able to feel otherwise. It's easy to say, welcome to Heart Mountain, but it's hard to really feel it, and I was able to achieve that with Johnny Tim's help. So for me, this is going so much further beyond a land acknowledgement that you state at the beginning of your conference or something, which is important, but this is walking the walk, at least where we're starting to. And by welcoming him into the fold, I could have my other staff talk about how this land is important to Indigenous nations, but it's something different to have him there. Like, I want him at the table. I want him to be leading this conversation and shaping how we tell the stories of his people on our site. And it's so important. It's difficult to measure, but as you can see, like, there's something intangible that is so important, and I'm just really inspired and excited to be engaging in this kind of work. At last year's pilgrimage event, at the end of July each year, we have a pilgrimage event where mostly the families of former incarcerees who don't live in Wyoming anymore, they come back to the site as a way to connect with each other, a way to have fun, a way to heal, a way to honor their ancestors. And this last year, Johnny Tim sang an opening song, and his son came up and sang with him, and boy, did his son just like charm the socks off of everybody who's there. He's in high school in Cowley, Wyoming, and to just see this multiple generations of Japanese Americans, and to see Johnny Tim and his son, who's also named Johnny Tim, up on stage singing, blessing our site, was so inspiring. And this summer, also in July, young Johnny Tim will be taking part of what we're calling a digital storytelling workshop funded by the Wyoming Humanities Council. Funded by Wyoming Humanities, where we will be bringing 3 Absaloka youth and 3 Japanese American youth together to the site to tell their stories, to experience this place that is so meaningful to both communities, and producing short, YouTube clips about their experience and their connection to heritage and place. And young Johnny Tim will be one of our participants. He so inspired one of our other pilgrimage attendees, a Japanese American family. She, Mrs. Verna Amakawa, painted this portrait of him after meeting him, and the fact that we're able to create art and create community across these divisions that would have seemed so difficult. We're just doing it. Same way that Siobhan just was like, you know what, let's do this. And it's beautiful. It's like this kintsugi gold across a fractured history. So that's a little bit about the, Indigenous connections, homesteader connections, and obviously Japanese American connections that we're working on. Let's go deep into some preservation stuff. One of the most complex And most fascinating projects we're working on right now with historic preservation. And I'm reminded right now that I owe some updates and documents to Brian for SHPO because we've done some work. But we are working on restoring the single remaining root cellar that was built by Japanese American incarcerees. One of the greatest hardships of the camp originally was that they didn't have enough food. And I'm actually going to come back to this restoration slide. But there were food shortages everywhere, which led to a lot of political pressure for incarcerees to grow their own food. And actually that was part of the plan originally when they picked this site, like, oh, this is a site that could be converted into farmland. It was a camp-wide effort from children all the way, you know, up through adulthood, men and women. Everybody kind of took part in this agriculture project. The irrigation canal that was completed by Japanese American incarcerees is still what is in use today by farmers who, you know, it's farmland up there. The only reason that they're able to farm that land is because of the irrigation canal completed by Japanese American incarcerated labor. But these were a lot of actually very highly skilled farmers who were put in prison on this site on the West Coast. Part of why there was so much animosity against Japanese Americans pre-war is because they were so successful at farming, and it presented like some economic jealousy and economic threat to the white farmers there. So these folks knew what they were doing when it came to working the land. It's a different growing season, obviously, different kinds of soil, but through their ingenuity and stick-to-itness and engineering skill, we grew 45 different crops in that, you know, high plains desert area, including all these like Chinese cabbage and daikon radish, the types of food that they would have wanted to eat, matching the Japanese cultural palate. And it was so successful that in 1944 alone, we had 5.1 million pounds of produce, quite enough to feed the population at Heart Mountain, and we ended up shipping food to other camps who needed food, and also selling produce to the local communities who were also experiencing food shortages. There were pork and chicken farms as well, and in order to store that much produce, the incarcerees built 2 enormous root cellars. One of them is collapsed, but the other one is still salvageable. And so since 2018, we've been working on saving this structure, which is really the last of its kind. Other camps had root cellars, but none of them are at a point anymore that can really be legitimately preserved. And so really it's a unique structure in the world as well. Started restoration in 2018, we were trucking along, and then the pandemic came along, and that derailed a bunch. So just last summer, we resumed the work that had been planned earlier, and that's why I owe Brian an update on the work that was done last summer. It was extraordinary, and it's one thing to say, yeah, we have a root cellar, but this thing is huge. It is the length of a football field. This is what it looked like before we started restoration, a historic photograph, and then these vents, these are air vents to keep the produce fresh and from rotting, completely collapsed in. In 2018, you know, we were starting some repair on the roofs, and that's what it looks like on the inside. That car is not historic, that was post-war. The homesteading family who acquired the property after the war used it for their own potatoes, and that's their car in there, but it's still cool, so we left it in there. But that's what it looks like inside. It's almost cathedral-like. You go in our museum, you can learn a lot with your head, you know, reading panels, and you feel some things with your heart, but when you go into the root cellar, this is a full body learning experience because the temperature drops and it smells dusty, and there is almost no more powerful learning tool for us than this root cellar. So it's a very high priority for us to preserve it. Here's some of the work that we did this past summer. You know, this thing wasn't built to survive 80 years or 150 years. So a lot of the logs are rotting. It's been an amazing process of trying to figure out how to do this in a way that is as historically accurate as we can tell based on the records, but also something that will last. You could see some of the collapse that has happened. We've stabilized the structure so that, you know, the whole thing won't collapse, and then we're working on restoring the parts that can. This was before we started our work this past summer. And then here's some of the work we did last summer, pouring concrete, recreating the entrance. And this is what it looks like as of last week. We've still got another, you know, we've got to do more fundraising. We've got at least one more season to get it to the point where it is up to code and ADA accessible. But our aim, hopefully by the end of this year, maybe going into next summer's construction season, will be to make this thing so that it can be open to the public, so that people can safely enter and experience this magnificent structure. I'm not sure it was a very smart thing to embark onto this, but this is a passion project and we're doing it. It's amazing. And there's an example of, we were able to bring in select groups. Especially it's important for us to get former incarcerees in there so that they can see what we're doing. We might not finish it before they're all gone, but some have been able to go in and experience it. So that's what I'm sort of thinking of as a monument to the past. And also this ties in with the homesteader history, because folks there are farmers now and they're curious about this root cellar, and it gives us a lot of potential for bringing in the local community into this story. And then we also, as if, you know, working on the root cellar wasn't a big enough project on its own, we also have this other massive project, construction project that is now complete. Construction-wise, we, at the end of July this summer, we will be celebrating the grand opening of what we're calling the Minetta Simpson Institute at Heart Mountain, named after our two honorary advisors and just beloved figures, Senator Alan Simpson, who everybody knows, and his best buddy from childhood, Secretary Norman Minetta. And I'll also say, in my mind, this is also something in honor of Pete Simpson as well, because Pete's story and Al's story started off the same as Boy Scouts at Heart Mountain. I'll just briefly tell you the Norm and Al story, if you're not already familiar with it. So Al Simpson, along with his brother Pete, were children in Cody, Wyoming, when the camp was opened. And they were members of the Boy Scouts, also at camp, because it was a city. Life had to go on, and they had a Boy Scout troop in the camp. And they had 5 Boy Scout troops? Oh my, they had 5 Boy Scout troops. And so there was one courageous Boy Scout troop leader in Cody, Livingston. Was it Glenn Livingston, who was the Boy Scout troop leader? He got together with one of the 5 troop leaders out at camp and said, you know, we should get our kids together. And they did, and the idea was to show these children that even though there's this big scary place out there with barbed wire and guns pointing inward, like it was a scary thing for the local communities to have this, you know, effectively concentration camp, as they called it at the time, right there in their backyards. And these troop leaders said, let's have a jamboree of our kids together. And as fate would have it, young Al Simpson was partnered up with young Norm Minetta, and they shared a tent together in camp, and, you know, got into a little bit of mischief and had a great time and made good friends with each other, realized that they didn't actually have that much that separated them. They were very similar in spirit, and they became fast friends. Fast forward many decades, and the two of them ended up entering the US Congress right around the same time. Al as a conservative Republican joining the Senate from Wyoming, and Norm, a liberal Democrat, joining the House of Representatives from San Jose. They picked up their friendship right where they left it off, were the best of friends for their whole lives, and throughout their careers, as they both rose up to pretty close to the pinnacle of what you can be in your respective political parties. Throughout that, they worked on bipartisan legislation wherever they could, putting their belief in democracy and doing what's right ahead of their differences that they had on policy. And they had a lot of differences on policy. They didn't agree on everything, and that's the power of what their friendship was, is that they were very different people, but they had enough respect for each other and love for each other that they were able to make this friendship and this career work. Ultimately, Norm served as Secretary of Commerce under Bill Clinton, and then Secretary of Transportation under George W. Bush. Both men were awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by a president of the opposite party. We lost Norm in May 2 years ago, I think. So we're heartbroken that he wasn't able to be here to see this dream of ours be realized. But Al is still kicking it, along with his brother Pete, Millward's dad, up in Cody, and they will be there for our grand opening of this center in their name at the end of July. So this whole new expansion, this is new, and also this is new. So we've had a basically doubling of the size of our building. And what we envision for this space, so come July, we will have a permanent exhibit that celebrates the lives and careers and friendship of Norm and Al. Thanks again to Eric Sandine, who's been an advisor on this project. And this is the interior space. We now have a meeting space, and I just mentioned I don't know if I actually, did I mention it to you, Renee? Maybe I just thought of you in my head. This would be a great place for this group to convene in some future year. But this will be a place that's designed to look like the mess halls at camp. And this is a space where we envision bringing people together across differences. So a place where we could build Americans' consensus about some fundamental values in our democracy, like the rule of law and this now kind of radical notion that stereotyping hurts everybody, right? And to use the words of Al and Pete's mother, hatred corrodes the container it's carried in. That's a simple enough thing for everybody to agree on. And if we can build Americans' consensus around those basic fundamental ideals, again, it doesn't sound like a very radical thing, but we struggle with this in our society right now. And this is a place that we imagine having those kinds of conversations. We're wielding the power of place. There's something that happens when you get on site at Heart Mountain that, for me, it's a feeling of sort of a softening of the edges and an opening of the pores. You know, we can live in our own bubbles in our own daily lives, and we can have a conference at like a Holiday Inn meeting room or something, but when you're on this site, there's something that happens, and it's like, okay, everybody agrees that this is wrong, what happened here. Are there other things that we can agree upon? We don't have to agree on policy, but can we at least agree that hatred corrodes the container it's carried in? And what is a way forward? Let's use this model of Norm and Al and Pete to see if there's another way forward for our society. This helps us bring our message and our story about what happened at Heart Mountain into broader conversations about democracy at large and about race in America. And this is the first group that's center. It's not even open yet. We didn't even have furniture at this time. We had to haul chairs from another part of the building. But word is getting out, and this is the first group that used the space is the Western States fire leaders of the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management. And they reached out and they said, we're having our conference in Cody. Can we come out and use your meeting space? And we said, well, we don't have chairs, but sure, come out. And here they are in this space. And as I've talked with Eric, it's kind of, we run the risk at Heart Mountain of being pigeonholed as a place that is just about like World War II history, or it's about a Japanese-American story, and therefore the rest of America doesn't really have a place there because it's a Japanese-American thing. Or it's a social justice thing. And we are all of those things. But we're also a place where amazing agriculture happened, right? We're also a place where the fire leaders of the Bureau of Land Management would be like, oh, we want to come there. So our story can and should and is relevant to everybody, no matter what. You know, if you're a football fan, we have an amazing football story at Heart Mountain. It was a town. So any sector of society can be interested in what we have to offer, and now we have a space to offer that, and it's a way of bringing our, basically it's a community center that we have at this community that's being reformed now. So it's very exciting times. There's a whole other huge preservation project that I haven't even mentioned now, but Millward was really instrumental in helping us keep this chimney from toppling over a number of years back. One of the few remaining structures that is still there on the site, other than the root cellar, is the hospital complex. And this iconic chimney on the hill is the boiler room chimney from the hospital. This property is still, we don't own it at Hard Mountain. We own the root cellar because a local family donated it back to us. They recognized how important it was, and so they gave it back to us. We don't own the property that the hospital is on, but we're working with the Bureau of Reclamation and the Bureau of Land Management to acquire that property and ultimately work on restoring that hospital, and not even restoring it, but stabilizing it. I mean, the roof is blowing off with the wind, and thanks to Millward's work, we kept that chimney from toppling. It's stabilized. So there will be more to come on the hospital. And as we do this work, it's really, again, a project of connections, a project of community, as much as it is a project of sites and structures and history long past. So some examples is there anyone here from Park County Historic Commission? I'm the only one who came down from Park County. Yeah. So one of my staff members is on the advisory committee with Park County Historic Preservation Commission, which is wonderful. We're working with SHPO not as closely as we need to be. I keep thinking like, oh, I'm gonna be in trouble, but the intention is there to get caught up on everything we need to. We're working with, Return to Four Tops Father is a pilgrimage of Upsaloka people who come back to this sacred mountain of theirs every year, and so we're collaborating with them. One of the things we're doing this summer is to go out, boots on the ground, and meet our neighbors, the local landowners who are mostly farmers, and just updating them on all of the construction that they're seeing on our site. What are we doing? Here's who we are. We've had a lot of turnover in staff, and so we don't know each other. And we know that our survival really depends on having good relations with the local community. So we're going out and taking baked goods to our neighbors and inviting them to come to our museum. And one of our ultimate goals in developing those relationships is to protect our viewshed. We know that part of the power of our place is that from our museum you can see the mountain. You can have a direct line of sight to the mountain, and that power of place would really be hampered if buildings or other kinds of development went up in between, interrupting that line of sight. So there aren't any threats right now, but we want to prepare for those threats before we have to panic about it. So building relations with our community is the way that we're going about doing that. We're working with the Nature Conservancy, we work closely with the BLM and the BOR, and I'm a relationship person, so this stuff is really fun for me. It feeds me. And I think that local people want to be involved with it as well. So in sum, we're working on preservation and restoration as a form of remembrance to honor the people who were there, my family and the other families who were there at Heart Mountain. I'm going to come back to resistance because that's an interesting one. And I'm pointing at Siobhan because you made me think of that. But we're doing preservation as a form of connection in the now, and we're doing preservation as a form of healing. There's still a lot of healing in our communities that needs to happen, and we're using our preservation work to do that. One of the extraordinary things that the group from San Jose, Tyco, reflected on as well when they went in the barrack, somebody commented, it feels like restoring this barrack is a form of resistance, which I hadn't really thought about, but like almost political resistance by saving this building, like what you were talking about, Siobhan. Your restoration of this building was a form of resistance, like we're going to bring this highway through, and you were saying, no, you will not erase our history. A lot of Japanese American history has been erased, a lot of indigenous history has been erased, and this comment that preserving the barrack is kind of a way of saying, like, we will not be erased. We will force people to remember what happened here by preserving this beautiful structure and making people feel something when they come here, which is a really cool way of thinking about it. So that's what I've got. How did I do on time? Oh, good. It's 11:45. I think I'm supposed to let you go at 12, so I'm happy to take any questions or comments. Yeah, no word.